Hey y'all, this is Katie Powell, and this is my facilitation of discussion on the Reis article, Gifted Girls, 25 Years Later, Hopes Realized and New Challenges Found. As I got into this article, I found that I really enjoyed it, and I hope that y'all get as much out of it as I did. So the article started with kind of an article analysis of a previous article written by Anne-Marie Roper. And it was based off of her study of the young gifted girl, a contemporary view. Now, contemporary, keeping in mind that all the dates referenced in this article were pre-1970s. And so Roper first identified in the pre-1950s, there were strict guidelines and expectations for gifted girls. They were to be passive, they were to be obedient, they needed to cater to the needs for others, and ultimately just prepare themselves for motherhood. As we shifted into the 1950s, then the idea came of, well, gifted must just mean that you're more masculine, and society couldn't work with the idea of you can be gifted and be a female, because giftedness had just so many masculine qualities. And then it shifted again in the 1960s and the 1970s with the women's movement, but the gifted qualities were still considered masculine. Gifted girls tended to identify more with their working fathers than their mothers. And so then this led to Roper's idea of gifted girls in the future, and whether or not they could be gifted female and still be a good mother. This was a time where women tended to be homemakers and take care of a family and rear children. And so if you were a gifted female, could you still do this? And so then she shifted to another reference of Gerda Lerner, where the idea of women knew about their gifts and talents, and those who knew fought these different constraints. Now, this article by Lerner was written in 1993, so we've gotten out of the 70s. We're entering into preparing for the new century. And so the idea that over time, women have known about their gifts and talents, but knowing led to complexities. How do I take my gifts and talents and still be a contributing member of society, maintain societal expectations? And these complexities often resulted in isolation and loneliness. And so then this takes us to one of the examples that Reis identified from a student that she taught in 1976. And the student's name was Heather, and Heather built a robot. She spent 7 months building this robot as a sixth grader. And word got out through the newspaper that Heather had built this robot, and people started coming to the school to interview Heather, to see this robot, to see what all this amazing young child had accomplished. And Heather noticed that there was a difference in the questions from the males that visited versus the females. The women tended to ask her what her design was like, what motor she chose and why, her ideas. They wanted to know the process behind her robot. Whereas the men, Heather identified, would initially come in, and their one and only question would be in this joking manner of, well, is your robot going to do all the housework? And Heather, I pointed this out to Reis and was like, look, I'm being asked these different questions. Why do men think that my robot is only intended to do housework? And it really just raised the question of, can we get past that stereotype? If we've got this exceptionally bright, young, gifted student who has a phenomenal engineering mind, and yet we still want her to conform to this idea of women are supposed to be in the house doing housework. And so then that takes us to exploring the underachievement of talented females. We're still in a very much a male-dominated society. Men, according to statistics, have more patents out, they've published more research, they've produced more art. Men just have this very prominent role in society. And so it poses the question of, are the statistics twisted, or do women just hold back in pursuit of other things? And one of the quotes that I found was that talented women find meaningful work that allows for happiness in relationships. And Reis goes on to also say, what one accomplishes in life is difficult to measure and is not simply the product of one's efforts, but also what one person helps and enables others to do. And I think that quote was just extremely powerful, of what we may view as success for some may not be what others view. and it all is just a matter of that perspective. So that led to a section called a case in point, and Reis identified a friend that she grew up with, and this friend's mother. And the friend's mother graduated from a top women's college. She was very well read, but she chose to stay at home. And Reis describes how she would go over to this friend's house and have book discussions with the friend's mother. And after she went off to college and came back and was teaching English, she would meet with this friend's mother in the library to discuss different books and different things and lessons. And what she gathered from getting to know this lady was that she loved getting to raise her successful and gifted children. The friend went on to be a scientist and earn her PhD. She had many other successful children. And so Reis came to this conclusion that Roper might not have portrayed the full picture, in that we tend to overgeneralize what the expectations are, or what the idea is for these gifted women, and that gifted women still are going to seek meaningful work, but that giftedness is going to be defined in many different ways. And what it comes down to is it's all about balance. And Reis identified that there's got to be this balance, and in that balance, the younger women can learn so much from older gifted women. And again, here's another quote that I found. There's no clear path for any of us, as our lives and creativity are both more connected with our love for our family and our friends. And so that, I think, just kind of describes how this, I hate to say conundrum, but this kind of scale that we find ourselves in, of women are just by general nature nurturing, and they want to be there, and they want to be loving and supportive. And when you've got that giftedness thrown into it, it shouldn't constrain what it is that we want to do. And so then a section on diversification of talents and creativity. So the idea of women's creativity can be spread out over many areas in terms of relationships, how they interact with their family and friends, work for their family or for the home. So how they decorate their house can show the creativity, the meals that they cook, how they choose to manage their time, and juggling kids' schedules and family schedules and all these different things, and then throw their personal interests, and then any kind of impact that they have in terms of appearance or anything like that. Women's creativity isn't the possibilities are just so broad. And Reis she interviewed Mary Hunter Wolfe, a Broadway actress, on just kind of women versus men. And one of the things that stuck out to me were the goals of men versus the goals of women in the eyes of Mary Hunter Wolfe. And men have this one end goal, or they tend to have this one end goal, and everything that they do in their life is to get to that end goal. Whereas women will just move from one task to another, and they choose to focus more on the joy and the journey than just trying to get to that goal. And so again, perception is evolving with time. So as men are becoming more active in day-to-day family needs, this is allowing women to pursue their own personal interests, and to find some more joy in that journey of exploring their gifts and their talents, while the men can also help rear their children. So that takes us to the summary, and just as I've said before, finding balance seems to be a key. Race was the kind of theme of this article that I found, is it all comes down to balance. Roper identified that gifted girls needed role models. Well, we're getting there, but it might not be as prominent as imagined. Women may not have the most leadership positions, have the most patents, have the most pieces of art out there, but they still have such an impact. And so our duty as educators is to identify and encourage these abilities, gifts, and talents. And for these gifted girls, what do they enjoy? Let's figure out what they enjoy, and then let's make it meaningful. Let's help them see how they can take their love, their interest, and their passions and just apply it in a way that they're going to feel like they contribute and can do so happily. All right, just a few questions for discussion to wrap up this article. The first one, do you see a major discrepancy in how gifted females are treated compared to gifted males? Heather, The robotics student pointed out the different questions she got from men compared to women who came to see the robot. Has there been a time where a student has made an observation that made you take a moment and think differently about a situation? And then how can we best support the needs of our gifted female students? So again, I hope you enjoyed this article as much as I did. There is the citation as a future reference, and I look forward to our discussion on the platform. Thank you.